So as soon as we take our music from the orchestral score world into a DAW, we have to deal with a certain loss of control over the musical ideas, which in turn forces our music to become somewhat simpler. So if we still want to write more complex and varied music, and at the same time want to be able to use all the sound design manipulating possibilities, we need to find a way to increase our control over the musical ideas in a DAW. So if one main issue is that the musical information and control we need gets lost the moment we take that whole score and record it as a whole and render it into one single audio file, let's instead break the score up into several samples and record and render these separately into several audio files. So for this first workflow, we also start the piece of music in a traditional score where we have a great amount of control of the musical ideas. And we are able to create very colorful and complex and varied structures and developments. Now, for two reasons, it's a good idea to just write more of a well-advanced sketch of a score here, rather than a fully finished one. So first, it saves us a lot of time, because at least for me, taking the score from this to its finished state is what usually takes up most of the time for me, so skipping that part can be a huge time saver. And second, by leaving some room in the composition in this stage, we are effectively making space for our DAW compositional process and the sound design improvisations to fill that space later, so that these improvisations can really become a fundamental and integral part of the music. Because, as mentioned before, a DAW encourages very different compositional workflows by giving us a lot of control of the timbre and sound and less control over the musical ideas, at least when compared to a musical score. Now, here's an example. This is the score sketch for the Orchesterverfremdung, which is a piece where I tested all three workflows we're going to look at here. So as you can see, this is a relatively well-advanced sketch, and you can find the link to the PDF file in the description of this video if you like. And there's a lot of musical information already there, but it's not really finished in a sense that no orchestra could really play this score like this. But I have sketched out motives and melodies and harmonic and rhythmic and melodic developments and the orchestration and the overall Dramaturgie, I would say in German, and have the whole score maybe about 70% finished, but then I stop. Now, in the next step, we have to translate and break up that unfinished score into many smaller samples. So here we are looking for things we can group together and record together, or sections we can just use as loops like this, or just voices we need to record separately, and so on. And of course, in this stage now we translate and prepare these samples in a way which will actually be playable for an orchestra and the musicians later. And we do that to the entire score until we are done. Now, deciding how to split up the score that way is actually not as simple as it might seem. For example, do we really need to record all the string parts in this section here separately, as if we did that, we would eventually have more control of the musical ideas and the sound. Or alternatively, we could also just record it all in one, as we wouldn't have to deal with several samples, but just one sample, and thus making it much more manageable from a workflow and sound design perspective. Also, this would save us valuable studio time. Now, these types of decisions already are an essential part of the whole creative process, as they eventually balance how much control we have over the music versus how much control we practically need. Because we could also just record every single note on its own, but that would be incredibly tedious to work with in a DAW. It would slow down our workflow a lot and eventually most likely sound like crap. So these types of decisions are incredibly important, as they directly impact the music we can write. Now, we can also anticipate all the sound design techniques we are going to use later. For example, if a phrase is rhythmically somewhat complicated for an ensemble to play, let's translate that into an easier form and re-edit it back later after the recording to save valuable studio time. Or if an instrument should play a passage which is way too fast, way too high, or both, let's translate that into a playable, transposed version and pitch it back up later. So as you can see, this gives us a lot of freedom we would not have had writing a traditional score. Also, we don't necessarily have to translate it for orchestra. Working with soloists, with orchestral sound libraries and MIDI might be a better choice sometimes. And basically you can translate your score to every imaginable sound source, like synthesizer, a sampler playing NASA sounds from Jupiter, a wine glass, some stones, a vacuum cleaner, a hairdryer. I mean, whatever works for you, really. And for me, the further apart the different sound sources are, sound-wise, the easier it is to embrace the artificial character of the whole sound, and the more encouraged I am to dig into the sound design part of things and make things fit together. So in this case, I just happened to choose an orchestra because A, I like it, and B, I had the opportunity to record with the German film orchestra Babelsberg a couple of times. But yeah, you can basically translate your score to anything that produces sounds. If we translate the score for real breathing musicians, now the next step would be rehearsing with the musicians and eventually recording and mixing and mastering these samples. And the great thing here is realism and consistency in the sound is not really necessary. So recording in different rooms with different microphones is less of a problem. And like I said, I would even consider it more of an advantage, really. What is important, though, is to organize these samples so that we know where they came from in the original score sketch. And that's also true if we produce the samples in any other way, like with MIDI and orchestral sample libraries, or in samplers in general, or with synthesizers and so on. So in the last step, and this is where the fun part starts, we will go through the sketch section by section, choose the samples that make up that section, and just start playing around with them. Using all the techniques we talked about in part 1 of this series, improvising and just seeing what sticks and what doesn't, and what works for us and what doesn't, and keep on going until we're satisfied with the result. Then we move on to the next section until we are done. And after that, I tend to resample the stems and start processing these again, like we talked about in the resampling chapter in part 1 of the series. With the Orchesterverfremdung, for example, I did probably close to 30 of these stem resampling cycles, getting all the benefits you would get from working with resampled audio files. And the great thing now is that we have, on the one hand, a lot of control over the timbre to really lose ourselves in the bazillion ways in which we can morph sounds and play with the sound design part of things and look for new and interesting colors and sounds. And on the other hand, we always have the score as some kind of guideline of where the music should go next, so we never really get lost. Plus, we have musical audio material which is in itself already composed and fairly complex and has this inherent dramaturgy ingrained in its audio DNA. Also, if you should use this for any kind of film music, working with different cut versions of a film can be much easier, and varying and recomposing parts of that work can be easily achieved, whereas traditional orchestral workflows are much more difficult to adapt. So to recap, this first workflow is about writing a well-advanced sketch of a score first, then breaking it up and translating it into several smaller sections and samples, which are then recorded and produced. Afterwards, we reassemble the original score in a DAW by putting all these small pieces and samples back together. And at this point, we now have both a decent amount of control over the musical ideas, as well as enough control over the sound design to leave out some parts of the score sketch, or to develop and reinterpret other ideas, and to really play with the material while still maintaining the score's potential for complexity and using all of the sound design potential of a DAW. And yeah, that's the first workflow I found. If you would like to hear some music written that way, the chapters 1, 3 and 5 of the Orchesterverfremdung were all composed that way. So yeah, if you like, have a listen. And again, let me know what you think. If you have any thoughts, any questions, any remarks, please let me know in the comments below and I will make sure to get back to you. Also, if you liked this video, hit the little like button. And if you would like to see more of these videos in the future, please also consider subscribing. So in the next video, we will look at another workflow which is much more based around improvisations with real musicians and which makes even more room for the sound design improvisations within a score. So yeah, see you there.